The sun had not yet crested the distant mountains when Zara Blackburn slipped out of the farmhouse, her boots making soft impressions in the dewy grass. A single valise clutched in her trembling hand contained everything she owned in the world, a pitiful collection for a woman of 23 years. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she cast one last glance at the weathered ranch house that had been her home for the past 8 months. She hadn't meant to stay this long. She hadn't meant to care. The pale light of dawn was just beginning to streak across the Montana sky of 1885, when Zara heard the creak of the screen door behind her. Freezing in place, she closed her eyes briefly before turning around, expecting to find the rugged face of Lucas Thompson, the widowed rancher who had hired her as a governess for his young son. Instead, she found herself looking down into the wide eyes of 6-year-old Henry Thompson. "Where you going, Miss Zara?" Henry asked, his small voice cutting through the still morning air. He stood barefoot on the porch in his nightshirt, tousled hair sticking up in all directions, clutching his wooden horse to his chest. "I have to leave, Henry," Zara replied softly, adjusting her grip on the valise. "I've stayed too long already." Henry's bottom lip trembled. "But sunrise don't look right without you." The simple words pierced Zara's carefully constructed resolve. For months, she'd been watching the sunrise with Henry from the front porch, teaching him about the changing colors of the sky, pointing out the constellations as they faded with the coming light. It had become their ritual, their special time together, while Lucas was out checking the cattle. "Henry, what are you doing out of bed?" Lucas's deep voice came from inside the house, and then he too appeared on the porch. He stopped short at the sight of Zara standing in the yard, valise in hand, clearly caught in the act of departure. His dark hair was disheveled from sleep, and his broad shoulders filled the doorframe. The lines around his eyes, etched there from years of squinting into the sun, and from grief following his wife's death 3 years prior, deepened, as understanding dawned on his face. "You're leaving," he stated flatly, no question in his voice. Zara lifted her chin. "I told you when I arrived that I wouldn't stay permanently. The school in Helena has offered me a teaching position. The stage coach leaves from town this morning." "Without saying goodbye?" Lucas asked, his voice betraying no emotion, though his eyes told a different story. "I left a letter," Zara replied, gesturing vaguely toward the house. "I thought it would be easier this way." "Easier for whom?" Lucas stepped onto the grass, his tall frame silhouetted against the growing light. At 32, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had faced the harsh realities of the frontier and survived, though not without scars both visible and invisible. Henry ran down the steps and wrapped his small arms around Zara's skirts. "Please don't go, Miss Zara." "Who's gonna teach me my letters? Who's gonna tell me stories about the stars?" Zara felt tears threatening and blinked rapidly to dispel them. "Your father can teach you your letters, and the stars will still be there whether I tell you their stories or not." "It ain't the same," Henry insisted, his voice muffled against the fabric of her dress. Lucas approached slowly, as if afraid she might bolt like one of the wild mustangs he sometimes captured and gentled. "Henry's right. It wouldn't be the same." He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. "Nothing would be the same without you here, Zara." The way he said her name, not Miss Blackburn, as he had always addressed her in the past, sent a tremor through her body. Over the past months, she had done everything in her power to maintain a professional distance between them. She was the governess. He was her employer. The fact that her heart raced whenever he entered a room was irrelevant. The fact that she found herself watching him from the window as he worked with the horses was a weakness she refused to acknowledge. "I need to go," Zara whispered, gently disentangling herself from Henry's grip. This was only ever meant to be temporary. Why? Lucas asked simply. Zara looked at him incredulously. You know why? I came here because I needed work after my aunt passed and left me with nothing. You needed someone to look after Henry and teach him until you could send him to school. That arrangement was never meant to be permanent. Maybe not at first, Lucas conceded, taking another step toward her. But things change, Zara. People change. I can't stay, she insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. Can't or won't? The question hung in the air between them. In the distance, a rooster crowed, announcing the coming day. The golden light of sunrise was beginning to spill over the mountains, bathing the land in a warm glow. Papa says you make the sun shine brighter, Henry announced suddenly, with the innocent honesty of a child. Zara's eyes flew to Lucas's face, and she saw the color rise in his cheeks. Henry, Lucas said with a warning tone, but there was no real reprimand in it. He does. Henry persisted. I heard him tell Mr. Jenkins that since you came, the whole ranch seems brighter. He said you're like sunshine after a long winter. Zara felt her heart skip a beat. She had overheard similar sentiments once, when Lucas was speaking with his foreman, but she had convinced herself she had misunderstood or that his words had been meant merely as appreciation for her work with Henry. Is that true? She asked softly, her eyes meeting Lucas's. Lucas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort. Henry has a way of speaking plainly, he said, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. But yes, it's true. This place we haven't been the same since Catherine died. Henry was just a baby when she passed, and I've done my best, but... He trailed off, shaking his head. When you came, something changed. It wasn't just that Henry was learning his letters or that there was someone to mend our clothes. It was like the house became a home again. Zara clutched her valise tighter, as if it could somehow anchor her against the tide of emotions threatening to sweep her away. Lucas, I know what you're going to say, he interrupted. That you're not Catherine, that you didn't come here to replace her or to be a mother to Henry. That you have your own dreams and plans that don't include being stuck on a ranch in the middle of nowhere with a widower and his son. That's not, let me finish, Lucas said, his voice gentle but firm. I'm not asking you to be Catherine. No one could replace her, and I wouldn't want them to. What we're asking is for you to consider that maybe your dreams and plans could include us. Henry nodded enthusiastically. Please stay, Miss Zara. I promise I'll be good and learn all my sums. Despite herself, Zara felt a smile tug at her lips. You're already good, Henry. Then why are you leaving? The question, so simple and yet so complex, hung in the air. Zara looked from Henry's pleading face to Lucas's hopeful one and felt her carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. The truth was, she had been running her entire life. After her parents died when she was just 12, she had been passed from relative to relative, never staying in one place long enough to put down roots. When her last living relation, Aunt Gertrude, passed away, leaving her with nothing but debts, Zara had answered the advertisement for a governess position on a remote Montana ranch out of desperation. She had told herself it would be temporary, just long enough to save money for a proper teaching position in a town where she could be independent, beholden to no one. But somewhere along the line, between teaching Henry his letters and cooking meals for the three of them, between watching Lucas gentle a wild horse and listening to him read aloud to his son in the evenings, she had begun to feel something she had never felt before, a sense of belonging. I'm leaving because I'm afraid, Zara admitted, the words spilling out before she could stop them. Afraid of what? Lucas asked, taking another step toward her, close enough now that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. Afraid of wanting something I can't have. Afraid of building a life here only to have it taken away. Afraid of. She trailed off, unable to voice her deepest fear, that she might come to love this man and his son so deeply that losing them would destroy her. "Afraid of us," Lucas finished for her, his voice barely above a whisper. Zara nodded, a tear sliding down her cheek despite her best efforts to contain it. With a gentleness that belied his strength, Lucas reached out and brushed the tear away with his thumb. "I'm afraid too," he confessed. "Every day I wake up afraid that this will be the day you decide to leave. Every night I go to sleep afraid that I'll wake up and find you gone." "I left a letter," Zara repeated weakly. Lucas shook his head. "A letter isn't enough, Zara, not for what we've come to mean to each other." "And what is that?" she whispered, needing to hear him say it. Lucas took a deep breath, as if gathering his courage. "I love you," he said simply. "I didn't expect it, I didn't look for it, but there it is, plain as day. I love you, and I hope that you might feel something for us too." Zara's breath caught in her throat. She had imagined hearing those words so many times, had dreamed of them, had feared them, and now that they were out in the open, she found herself speechless. Henry, apparently tired of the adult conversation, tugged on her skirt again. "Do you love us too, Miss Zara?" "Papa says we shouldn't ask people such personal questions, but I think this is important." A laugh bubbled up through Zara's tears. Leave it to a child to cut straight to the heart of the matter. She knelt down to Henry's level and looked into his eyes so much like his father's. "Yes, Henry, I do love you, very much," Henry beamed. "And Papa too." Zara's eyes traveled up to meet Lucas's. The hope in his gaze was almost too much to bear. "And your Papa too," she admitted softly, "though I've tried very hard not to." Relief washed over Lucas's face, followed by a joy so pure it transformed his usually serious features. "Stay," he said, extending his hand to her. "Not as our governess, but as part of our family. I'm not asking for promises you're not ready to make, just a chance for us to see where this leads." Zara looked at his outstretched hand, then at her valise, then at the open gate that led to the road to town and the waiting stagecoach. Stay or go? It was the simplest of choices and the most difficult one she had ever faced. "The sunrise really doesn't look right without you," Lucas added, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Zara looked at the horizon, where the sun was now fully visible, casting long shadows across the land that had become so dear to her. Then she looked at the man and the boy who had somehow worked their way past her defenses and into her heart. Slowly, deliberately, she set down her valise. "I suppose the school in Helena will have to find another teacher," she said, and placed her hand in Lucas's. His fingers closed around hers, warm and calloused from years of ranch work. His touch sent a current of something like lightning through her body, and she knew in that moment that she had made the right choice. Henry whooped with delight and threw his arms around both of them. "Does this mean you're staying forever?" he asked, looking up at Zara with shining eyes. Forever was a promise Zara wasn't quite ready to make, but as she stood there in the golden light of dawn, her hand in Lucas's and Henry's arms around her waist, she found herself closer to believing in it than she had ever been before. "Let's start with today," she suggested, squeezing Lucas's hand. "And then tomorrow and the day after that." Lucas nodded, understanding in his eyes. "One sunrise at a time," he agreed. Together, the three of them turned to watch as the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting its light over the Thompson ranch, a light that suddenly seemed full of possibility. In the weeks that followed, Zara settled into a new rhythm on the ranch. No longer just the governess, she found herself increasingly involved in the daily operations of the Thompson household, and by extension, the ranch itself. Lucas had been hesitant at first, not wanting to burden her with responsibilities she hadn't signed up for, but Zara had insisted. "If I'm to be part of this family," she had told him one evening as they sat on the porch after Henry had gone to bed. "Then I want to be fully part of it. That means sharing the work as well as the joys." Lucas had looked at her with a mixture of admiration and something deeper, something that made her heart race. "You continue to surprise me, Zara Blackburn." "In good ways, I hope," she had responded, a teasing lilt in her voice that she hadn't known she possessed until coming to the ranch. "In the best ways," he had assured her, reaching for her hand in the darkness. Those quiet moments in the evening became precious to both of them, a time when, with Henry asleep, they could talk freely about their pasts, their present, and tentatively, their future. Zara learned that Lucas had come west as a young man of 20, full of dreams of building something of his own. He had worked as a ranch hand for years, before saving enough to buy his own small plot of land. He had met Catherine in town one day when delivering cattle to market. She was the daughter of the local mercantile owner. Their courtship had been brief but intense, and within 6 months they were married. "We were happy," Lucas told Zara, his voice soft with memory but no longer heavy with grief. "Those were good years. When she died in childbirth, I thought that was the end of happiness for me. I focused entirely on Henry and the ranch. I never expected to feel this way again." "And how do you feel?" Zara had asked, needing to hear it again. Lucas had turned to her then, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "Like a man who's been given a second chance at life." As summer turned to fall, the days grew shorter, and the work on the ranch intensified in preparation for winter. Zara found herself rising before dawn each morning, not to leave but to begin the day's tasks. She still watched the sunrise with Henry, but now Lucas often joined them, the three of them sharing those quiet moments as the world awakened around them. One crisp September morning, as they stood on the porch watching the sky lighten, Henry asked the question that had been on Zara's mind as well. "When are you going to marry Miss Zara, Papa? Mr. Jenkins says it ain't proper for her to stay here unwed for so long." Zara felt her cheeks burn, and she shot a mortified glance at Lucas, who looked equally taken aback. "Henry," Lucas began, his voice stern, "what have I told you about repeating things you overhear?" Henry scuffed his boot against the porch boards. "Not to do it," he mumbled. "But I was wondering too." Lucas sighed and knelt down to his son's level. "That's a question that Miss Zara and I need to discuss privately. It's not something you need to worry about." "But you do want to marry her, don't you?" Henry persisted, his young face serious. Lucas's eyes met Zara's over Henry's head, and she saw in them a question and a promise. "Yes," he said softly, still looking at her. "I do, but these things take time, and it's not just my decision." Zara's heart beat so loudly she was certain both Lucas and Henry must hear it. They had spoken of feelings, of family, of building a life together, but neither had explicitly mentioned marriage. Yet here it was, out in the open thanks to a 6-year-old's innocent query. "Henry, why don't you go fetch the eggs for breakfast?" Zara suggested, finding her voice at last. "Your father and I need to talk." Henry looked between them, a sly smile spreading across his face. "Are you going to kiss? Mrs. Peterson says grown-ups need privacy for kissing." "Henry," Lucas exclaimed, but there was laughter in his voice. "The eggs, please." Once Henry had scampered off toward the chicken coop, Lucas straightened and turned to Zara. "I'm sorry about that. Jenkins had no right to, is he wrong?" Zara interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. Lucas blinked. "About it not being proper?" "I suppose not, by the standards of society, but I've never much cared for—" "No," Zara cut in again, her heart pounding. "About whether you want to marry me." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Lucas took a step toward her, then another, until he was close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "No," he said softly, "he's not wrong about that. He reached for her hands, holding them in his larger ones. "I love you, Zara. I want to build a life with you. I want to make this official, to make you my wife, if that's what you want too. But I didn't want to rush you. I know how much your independence means to you." Zara looked up into his face, this man who had somehow come to mean everything to her in the span of less than a year. "I thought independence meant being alone," she confessed. "Standing on my own without needing anyone. But I've come to realize that real strength can come from connection too, from choosing to be with someone who respects your choices and supports your dreams." "Is that what I do?" Lucas asked, a hint of vulnerability in his voice. Zara nodded, squeezing his hands. "You've never once asked me to be less than I am. You've encouraged me to teach, to read, to speak my mind. You've treated me as an equal, not a possession." "I would never want to possess you," Lucas said firmly. "I only want to love you, to build something with you that's stronger than what either of us could create alone." Zara felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "Then ask me," she whispered. Lucas's eyes widened, and then a slow smile spread across his face. Without releasing her hands, he lowered himself to one knee on the rough wooden boards of the porch. "Zara Blackburn," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion she could see in his eyes. "Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Will you continue to watch sunrises with us, teach Henry his sums, and build a life with me on this land? Will you be my partner in all things, as I promise to be yours?" Zara felt as though her heart might burst from the fullness of her joy. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." Lucas rose and pulled her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that held both tenderness and passion. Zara melted into him, her arms winding around his neck, her body fitting perfectly against his as if they had been made for each other. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Zara looked up to see Henry watching them from the yard, a basket of eggs in his hands and a wide grin on his face. "Does this mean you're going to be my ma now?" he called, bouncing on his toes in excitement. Zara looked to Lucas, who nodded encouragingly. "If that's what you would like, Henry," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. Henry whooped and ran toward them, nearly upending the basket of eggs in his enthusiasm. Lucas deftly caught the basket with one hand while keeping his other arm firmly around Zara's waist. "I knew it," Henry exclaimed. "I knew if you stayed for enough sunrises, you'd stay forever." Lucas laughed, the sound rich and full. "Sometimes," he said, looking down at Zara with such love that it made her knees weak, "children are wiser than adults." The news of their engagement spread quickly through the small community. The ranch hands offered their congratulations, though most had seen this coming long before the couple themselves had acknowledged their feelings. Mrs. Peterson, the widow who lived on the neighboring farm, took it upon herself to help with the wedding preparations, declaring that every bride needed a proper send-off, even one who was already living on the ranch. "It's not as if we're having a grand affair," Zara protested as Mrs. Peterson fussed over fabric swatches for a wedding dress. "Just a simple ceremony with the minister from town." "Nonsense," Mrs. Peterson declared, her gray curls bobbing as she shook her head emphatically. "Lucas Thompson is one of the most respected ranchers in the county, and you'll be the first bride we've had in these parts in nearly 2 years. Everyone will want to celebrate, and celebrate they did." On a crisp October morning, with the aspen trees blazing gold against the blue Montana sky, Zara stood in the small bedroom that had been hers and looked at her reflection in the mirror. The dress Mrs. Peterson and the other women had helped her sew was simple but beautiful ivory cotton with lace trim that had been carefully removed from Mrs. Peterson's own wedding dress and sewn onto the collar and cuffs. "You look beautiful," came a small voice from the doorway. Henry stood there in his Sunday best, his hair slicked down with water and a solemn expression on his face. "Thank you, Henry," Zara said, turning to smile at him. "You look very handsome yourself." Henry entered the room and stood beside her, both of them regarding their reflections in the mirror. "Papa says I get to give you away since you don't have a pa of your own. Is that all right?" Zara felt her heart swell with love for this child who had so easily accepted her into his life. "It's more than all right," she assured him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It's perfect." Henry beamed up at her. "I've been practicing walking real slow, like Mrs. Peterson showed me." "I'm sure you'll do wonderfully," Zara said, fighting back the tears that threatened to spoil the powder Mrs. Peterson had insisted on applying to her cheeks. A knock at the door frame drew their attention, and they turned to see Mrs. Peterson standing there, her round face flushed with excitement. "It's time, dear," she announced. "Everyone's gathered outside and your groom is looking as nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs." She chuckled at her own simile and bustled into the room to make one final adjustment to Zara's hair. "There. Perfect. Now, Henry, you remember what to do?" Henry nodded solemnly and offered his arm to Zara in a perfect imitation of a grown gentleman. "I'm to escort Miss Zara, I mean Ma, outside and give her to Papa when the minister asks." "That's right," Mrs. Peterson approved. "Now, let's not keep them waiting any longer." Zara took a deep breath, placed her hand on Henry's arm, and allowed him to lead her from the bedroom, down the stairs, and to the front door of the ranch house. Mrs. Peterson hurried ahead to give the signal to the fiddle player they had recruited from town. As the first notes of music drifted through the open door, Zara felt a momentary flash of panic. Was she really doing this? Committing herself to this life, this man, this child, this land? For a woman who had spent her whole life avoiding permanence, it was a monumental step. But then she looked down at Henry's earnest face, thinking of Lucas waiting for her outside, and all doubt fled. This was right. This was where she belonged. Together, she and Henry stepped out onto the porch and into the bright autumn sunlight. The yard had been transformed with benches brought from town and wildflowers gathered from the meadows. Standing before the gathered crowd of neighbors, ranch hands, and townspeople was Lucas, looking more handsome than Zara had ever seen him in a new suit. His hair neatly combed, his face alight with joy as he caught sight of her. The fiddle played a sweet, simple melody as Zara and Henry made their way down the makeshift aisle. Zara was vaguely aware of the smiling faces turning to watch her, but her eyes were fixed on Lucas, on the future they would build together. When they reached the front, the minister, a kind-faced man who traveled a circuit of small communities too remote to support their own churches, stepped forward. "Who gives this woman to be married to this man?" he asked, following the traditional formula. Henry straightened his shoulders and responded in a clear voice that carried across the yard. "I do, sir. Me and the sunrise." A ripple of laughter and appreciative murmurs ran through the crowd. The minister's eyes twinkled as he nodded to Henry. "Very well. You may join your father." Henry carefully placed Zara's hand in Lucas's, then moved to stand beside his father, his small face solemn with the importance of the moment. Lucas's fingers closed around Zara's, warm and strong. "You're beautiful," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, but Zara hardly heard the familiar words. She was lost in Lucas's eyes, in the promise of the life they would share. When the time came to speak her vows, the words flowed easily from her heart, a promise not just to Lucas but to Henry as well, to the family they would be together. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared at last. "You may kiss your bride." Lucas drew her close, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that sealed their commitment to each other. Around them, the assembled guests broke into applause and cheers. When they parted, both breathless and smiling, Henry threw his arms around their waists, and Lucas lifted him up to join their embrace. "We're a real family now," Henry announced proudly. "Yes, we are," Lucas agreed, his arm still around Zara's waist. "And we always will be." The celebration that followed was joyful and lasted well into the evening. Tables had been set up in the yard, loaded with food contributed by every household in the area. There was dancing to the fiddle music, laughter, and more congratulations than Zara could count. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land, Lucas found Zara sitting alone for a moment at the edge of the festivities. "Happy?" he asked, settling beside her and taking her hand. "More than I ever thought possible," she admitted, leaning her head against his shoulder. "You know," Lucas said thoughtfully, "when Catherine died, I never imagined I could feel joy again. I thought I would spend the rest of my life just existing, raising Henry as best I could, working the ranch until I was too old to continue. And then you arrived. With my single valise and my grand plans to leave as soon as possible," Zara reminded him with a soft laugh. "And yet here you are, Mrs. Thompson," Lucas said, a note of wonder in his voice as he used her new name for the first time. The sound of it sent a thrill through Zara. Mrs. Thompson. A name that connected her to others, that gave her a place in the world she had been searching for her entire life. "Here I am," she agreed. "And here I'll stay, to watch 1,000 more sunrises with you and Henry." Lucas's eyes darkened with emotion, and he leaned in to kiss her again, a kiss that held the promise of the night to come, their first as husband and wife. Zara responded eagerly, no longer concerned about propriety or appearances. This man was her husband, and she could love him freely and openly. "Ma, Papa!" Henry's voice broke them apart, and they turned to see him running toward them, his face flushed with excitement. "Mrs. Peterson says it's time to cut the cake, and then she says I have to go stay with her tonight because you two need privacy." He wrinkled his nose in confusion. "But we have a whole house. Why would you need more privacy?" Lucas coughed, and Zara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Mrs. Peterson is very thoughtful," Lucas managed to say, avoiding his son's question. "And cake sounds wonderful right now, doesn't it, Zara?" "Absolutely," Zara agreed quickly, standing and smoothing her dress. "Lead the way, Henry." As they followed Henry back to the celebration, Lucas leaned down to whisper in Zara's ear, "We'll have the whole night to ourselves." Zara's pulse quickened at the thought. Despite the months they had spent living under the same roof, Lucas had been scrupulously respectful of her reputation, never so much as entering her bedroom. Tonight, everything would change. They would truly become husband and wife in every sense. "I look forward to it," she whispered back, enjoying the way his eyes darkened at her words. The cake, a masterpiece of Mrs. Peterson's baking skills, was cut with much ceremony, and as the evening progressed, the guests gradually began to depart. Henry went off with Mrs. Peterson, exacting promises from both Zara and Lucas that they would come for him first thing in the morning. "Don't forget, we have to watch the sunrise together," he reminded them earnestly. "Now that you're married, it's even more important." "We won't forget," Lucas promised, ruffling his son's hair. "Now be good for Mrs. Peterson, and we'll see you tomorrow." When the last guest had departed and the ranch hands had tactfully made themselves scarce, Lucas and Zara found themselves alone in the house that was now truly their home. A moment of shyness fell between them, despite all they had shared over the past months. "Would you like some tea?" Lucas asked, running a hand through his hair in that gesture Zara had come to find so endearing. She shook her head, summoning her courage. "No," she said softly. "I would like you to show me to our room." Lucas's breath caught audibly, and then he was moving toward her, sweeping her up into his arms in a smooth motion that made her gasp. "Our room," he repeated, his voice rough with desire. "I like the sound of that." He carried her up the stairs to what had been his bedroom, now theirs, and set her gently on her feet beside the bed. The room was simply furnished but comfortable, with a large bed dominating the space, covered with a quilt that Zara recognized as Catherine's handiwork. Seeing her gaze fall on it, Lucas said, "I can remove it if it makes you uncomfortable." Zara touched the quilt gently, thinking of the woman who had come before her, who had loved this man and given him a son. "No," she said. "Catherine will always be part of your past, part of Henry's heritage." "I don't want to erase her." Lucas's eyes filled with gratitude. "You are a remarkable woman, Zara Thompson. And you," she said, reaching up to touch his face, "are a remarkable man, my husband." The words seemed to break something loose in both of them. Lucas pulled her to him, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that held none of the restraint of their previous embraces. Zara responded in kind, her hands exploring the broad expanse of his shoulders, the strong line of his back. Slowly, with reverent hands, Lucas began to undo the buttons of her wedding dress, each one revealing more of the simple cotton shift she wore beneath. Zara trembled under his touch, not with fear but with anticipation. "Are you cold?" Lucas asked, pausing in his task. Zara shook her head. "Just eager," she admitted, a blush rising to her cheeks. Lucas's eyes darkened, and he resumed his careful undressing, finally slipping the dress from her shoulders to pool at her feet. "You are so beautiful," he breathed, his gaze traveling over her form, still largely concealed by the shift. Zara's fingers, less steady than his, began to work on the buttons of his shirt. "Help me," she whispered, and Lucas obliged, quickly divesting himself of jacket, shirt, and undershirt until his chest was bare before her. Zara had seen him without a shirt before, glimpses caught when he was working in the yard on hot days, but never this close, never with permission to look and touch. She reached out hesitantly, placing her palm against his heart, feeling its strong, rapid beat beneath her hand. "I love you," she said, the words feeling inadequate for the depth of emotion sweeping through her. "And I love you," Lucas replied, gathering her into his arms again, "more than I have words to express." Their coming together was tender at first, each learning the other's body with gentle touches and whispered guidance. But as their comfort with each other grew, so did their passion, until Zara found herself swept away on a tide of sensation she had never imagined possible. Later, as they lay entwined beneath the quilt, Zara's head resting on Lucas's chest and his arms wrapped securely around her, she thought about the path that had led her here. The orphaned girl, the reluctant governess, the woman who had tried to leave at dawn, all of these were still part of her. But now she was also a wife, a mother, a woman who had found her place in the world. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked, his voice drowsy with contentment. "About how close I came to missing this," Zara admitted. "If Henry hadn't woken up that morning, if he hadn't said what he did about the sunrise." Lucas tightened his arms around her. "I would have come after you," he said with certainty. "I might have let you go that day, but I would have followed you to Helena or wherever you went. Some things are worth fighting for." Zara lifted her head to look into his eyes, seeing the truth of his words written there. "I'm glad I didn't make you chase me across Montana," she said with a smile. "So am I," Lucas agreed, returning her smile, "though I would have if needed." Zara settled back against him, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Outside, the stars wheeled across the vast Montana sky, and somewhere in Mrs. Peterson's house, Henry slept, dreaming perhaps of tomorrow's sunrise and the family that would watch it together. Tomorrow, Zara murmured, already half asleep, we'll see the sunrise as a family. The first of many, Lucas promised, placing a gentle kiss on the top of her head. And as Zara drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, she knew with absolute certainty that this was where she belonged. The woman who had tried to leave the ranch at dawn had found her home at last. As promised, Lucas and Zara collected Henry from Mrs. Peterson's house before dawn the next morning. The boy was bleary-eyed but excited, bombarding them with questions about their night alone while Mrs. Peterson tactfully busied herself in another room. Did you miss me? Did the house feel empty without me? Did you remember we have to watch the sunrise? The questions tumbled from his lips as Lucas lifted him into the wagon. We missed you terribly, Zara assured him, tucking a blanket around his legs against the morning chill. And of course we remembered about the sunrise. That's why we're here so early. Henry beamed, satisfied with her answer, and settled between them on the wagon seat for the short ride home. As they approached the ranch, the first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the eastern sky. Hurry, Papa, Henry urged. We're going to miss it. Lucas laughed and snapped the reins gently, encouraging the horses to pick up their pace. The sun will wait for us, son. It always does. They reached the house just as the sky was turning from gray to pale gold. Abandoning their usual spot on the porch, Lucas led them to a small rise behind the house, where they had a clear view of the eastern horizon and the mountains beyond. I thought we might start a new tradition, he explained, spreading a blanket on the ground for them to sit on. New family, new sunrise spot. Zara felt her heart swell with love for this man who understood so perfectly the significance of small rituals, of marking new beginnings. They settled on the blanket, Henry between them, and watched in companionable silence as the sun began to edge above the distant mountains. It's different every morning, Henry observed, his voice hushed with wonder. The colors, I mean. Yes, Zara agreed, watching as the pale gold deepened to amber, then to a brilliant orange that set the few scattered clouds ablaze. That's part of what makes it special. No two sunrises are ever exactly the same. Like people, Lucas added, reaching across Henry to take Zara's hand. Each one unique, each one beautiful in its own way. Henry considered this, his young face solemn. I'm glad our sunrise has you in it now, Ma, he said finally, using the new title with a hint of pride in his voice. So am I, Henry, Zara replied, squeezing his shoulder with her free hand. So am I. As the sun climbed higher, painting the land in shades of gold and rose, Zara felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. This was what she had been searching for all those years, not just a place to belong, but people to belong with. A family. The first year of marriage brought both joys and challenges. Winter descended on the ranch with a ferocity that Zara, despite having spent the previous winter there as a governess, was unprepared for. Snow piled high against the sides of the house, and temperatures plummeted to levels that made even the shortest trip to the barn an ordeal. Lucas worried constantly about the cattle, making frequent rides out to check on the herds despite Zara's concerns about him being caught in a sudden blizzard. The ranch hands earned their keep, and then some, working tirelessly to ensure the animals had access to feed and water despite the frozen conditions. Inside the house, Zara continued Henry's lessons, though they had expanded beyond basic reading and arithmetic to include history, science, and literature. The boy was a quick learner, his natural curiosity making teaching him a joy. You'll be the most educated rancher in Montana, Lucas often teased his son during their evening reading sessions. Or perhaps he'll choose another path entirely, Zara suggested once after Henry had fallen asleep and they were alone by the fire. A doctor, a lawyer, a teacher perhaps. Lucas considered this, poking at the logs in the fireplace with a stick. "I've always assumed he'd take over the ranch someday," he admitted. "It's what I've worked for all these years to build something I could pass on to him." Zara moved to sit beside him on the hearth rug, resting her head against his shoulder. "And if that's what he wants, it will be a wonderful legacy. But if his passions lead him elsewhere, would you be disappointed?" Lucas was quiet for a long moment, watching the flames dance. "I want him to be happy," he said finally. "That's more important than any plans I might have made before he was old enough to have dreams of his own." Zara turned to kiss his cheek, love for this thoughtful, open-hearted man filling her chest until she thought it might burst. "You are a remarkable father, Lucas Thompson." Lucas turned to capture her lips with his, the kiss deepening as he pulled her closer. "And you," he murmured against her mouth, "are a remarkable mother and wife." Their physical passion for each other had not diminished in the months since their wedding. If anything, it had grown stronger as they became more attuned to each other's desires and needs. Many a cold winter night was warmed by their lovemaking, tender or urgent as the mood took them. When spring finally arrived, bringing with it the chaos of calving season and the backbreaking work of repairing winter's damage to fences and outbuildings, Zara had news of her own to share. She waited until a rare quiet evening when Henry was already asleep and Lucas was relaxing with a cup of coffee after a long day's work. "I have something to tell you," she said, settling beside him on the sofa with her own cup of tea. Lucas turned to her with a smile, though she could see the fatigue in his eyes. "What's that?" Zara took a deep breath, suddenly nervous despite the joy that had been bubbling inside her since the town doctor had confirmed her suspicions the day before. "We're going to have a baby." Lucas's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips, his eyes widening. "A baby," he repeated, as if testing the word. "You're certain?" Zara nodded, watching his face carefully for his reaction. "Dr. Miller says I'm about 3 months along. The baby should arrive in late fall." For a moment, Lucas sat perfectly still and Zara felt a flutter of anxiety. Then, carefully setting his coffee cup on the side table, he turned to her and gathered her into his arms with a gentleness that brought tears to her eyes. "A baby," he said again, his voice thick with emotion. "Our baby." Zara relaxed into his embrace, relief washing over her. "You're happy then?" Lucas pulled back just enough to look into her face, incredulity written across his features. "Happy? Zara, there aren't words for what I'm feeling right now." He placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "A new life, created by our love. How could I be anything but overjoyed?" Zara covered his hand with her own, tears of happiness spilling down her cheeks. "I was hoping you would feel that way. I know we hadn't specifically discussed having more children, and with the ranch requiring so much work." "The ranch will always be here," Lucas interrupted gently. "And yes, there's always work to be done, but nothing is more important than family." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, and finally her lips. "Thank you for this gift, my love." Henry's reaction to the news shared with him the following morning was equally enthusiastic. "A brother or sister," he exclaimed, bouncing on his toes. "When? Can I help choose a name? Where will the baby sleep? Can I teach it things like you teach me, Ma?" Zara laughed at his barrage of questions, exchanging an amused glance with Lucas over the boy's head. "The baby will come in the fall. And yes, you can help with a name. We'll make space in the house somewhere, and of course you can teach the baby things when it's old enough." "I hope it's a brother," Henry declared, then immediately reconsidered. "Or maybe a sister would be nice too. I don't really mind which, as long as I can be a good big brother." "You'll be the best big brother any baby could ask for," Lucas assured him, ruffling his hair affectionately. As Zara's pregnancy progressed through the summer months, The entire ranch seemed to rally around her. The hands took on extra tasks to spare Lucas time to be with his family. Mrs. Peterson and the other women from neighboring ranches regularly brought over preserved foods and baby clothes, some new and some handed down through generations. Lucas, to Zara's mingled amusement and exasperation, became increasingly protective. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she protested one July afternoon when he insisted on carrying a basket of laundry for her. "Humor me," he replied with a grin that still made her heart skip a beat. "It makes me feel useful." As her body changed, growing round with the new life within, Zara found herself marveling at the miracle of it all. She had never imagined herself as a mother when she'd arrived at the ranch that first day, valise in hand and walls built high around her heart. Now, she couldn't imagine any other life. The baby, a girl they named Elizabeth Catherine Thompson, arrived on a crisp October day as the aspen trees were turning gold almost exactly a year after Zara and Lucas had exchanged their vows. The labor was long and difficult, with the midwife sending Lucas from the room more than once when his anxious hovering threatened to distract her from her work. When it was over, and Zara lay exhausted but triumphant with their daughter in her arms, Lucas was allowed to return. The look on his face as he beheld his wife and newborn daughter was one Zara knew she would remember for the rest of her days, a mixture of awe, love, and profound gratitude that mirrored the emotions overflowing in her own heart. "She's perfect," he whispered, perching carefully on the edge of the bed and reaching out a tentative finger to touch the downy hair on the baby's head. "Just like her mother." "She has your eyes, I think," Zara said, though it was too early to tell for certain. "And your stubborn chin." Lucas laughed softly. "Poor child, saddled with my features." "I happen to be quite fond of your features," Zara reminded him with a tired smile, "especially on our daughter." Henry, when allowed in to meet his sister, approached the bed with uncharacteristic caution, his eyes wide with wonder. "She's so small," he whispered, leaning in to examine the tiny face peering out from the blankets. "You were this small once too," Lucas told him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "But she'll grow just like you did." Henry nodded solemnly. "I'll help take care of her," he promised. "I'll teach her everything I know." "I'm counting on it," Zara said, reaching out to squeeze his hand. "She's going to need her big brother." As the first weeks with Elizabeth passed in a blur of feedings, diaper changes, and precious moments of quiet bonding, Zara found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this point. From the orphaned girl passed from relative to relative, to the young woman determined to make her own way in the world, to the wife and mother she now was, it had been a path of unexpected twists and turns. And it had all begun with a sunrise, with a little boy's innocent observation that the dawn didn't look right without her one morning. When Elizabeth was about 3 months old, Zara woke before dawn. Lucas slept peacefully beside her, his arm draped protectively across her waist even in sleep. In the cradle beside their bed, Elizabeth made the small snuffling sounds that usually preceded waking. Carefully extracting herself from Lucas's embrace, Zara lifted the baby and wrapped her in a warm blanket. On impulse, she carried her downstairs and out onto the porch, where the first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the eastern sky. "This is sunrise, little one," she whispered to her daughter, whose dark eyes were wide and alert despite the early hour. "It's very special to our family." The door creaked behind her and Zara turned to see Lucas and Henry emerging from the house, both still in their night clothes. "Room for 2 more?" Lucas asked softly, coming to stand beside her with Henry at his side. "Always," Zara replied, leaning into him as his arm slipped around her waist. Together, The four of them, the family that had found each other against all odds, watched as the sun climbed above the horizon, painting the Montana sky in shades of gold and rose and promise. "You were right, Henry," Lucas said, looking down at his son with a smile. "The sunrise doesn't look right without all of us here to see it together." Henry beamed up at his parents and sister, his face glowing in the early morning light. "And now we'll never miss one," he declared with the absolute certainty of a child who believes in happy endings. "Not ever." Zara, cradling her daughter in one arm and leaning against her husband with Henry pressed against her side, knew that there would be challenges ahead. Life on a ranch was never easy, and raising children brought its own unique trials. But in that perfect moment, with the sun rising on a new day and her family surrounding her, she also knew without a doubt that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The woman who had tried to leave the ranch at dawn had found not just a home but a heart's resting place, a belonging so deep and true that it had transformed her very soul. And as she stood there in the growing light, she silently thanked the twist of fate that had brought her to this place, and the small boy who had seen with such clarity what she had been too afraid to acknowledge. That sometimes the brightest futures are found not in running away, but in the courage to stay and watch the sunrise together, day after day, year after year, until the watching itself becomes a kind of love story, one that never ends.